Hey, it's Terry Gorry, and this is the Irish Law and Small Business podcast. Today we had the Ammi Burke case in the High Court. This was a judicial review application. Miss Burke, Ammi Burke, was a solicitor working for Arthur Cox Solicitors. She was dismissed in 2019. She brought a case to the Workplace Relations Commission, as you're supposed to do when you're unfairly dismissed, if that's your choice. She went to the WRC. A hearing was held then in 2021 or thereabouts, and the outcome of it was that her case was dismissed by the adjudication officer, Kevin Bainham. In the particular case, on the day, Kevin Bainham was forced to warn Miss Burke and her mother about their conduct and the inappropriate conduct and behaviour in which they were engaged. He warned them 3 or 4 times, and eventually, in trying to swear in a witness for the employer's side, for Arthur Cox, he was unable to do that, Mr. Bainham, because of the interruptions from Miss Burke and her mother. So the case was dismissed. Miss Burke then brought a judicial review application, and that goes to the High Court. And basically she was arguing that she should have another hearing at the WRC, that the adjudication officer, Kevin Bainham, was incorrect in dismissing her case. He wasn't entitled to do so, and that he was conducting it incorrectly in any event. She was arguing that it's supposed to be an inquisitorial or investigative process rather than an adversarial process, and she claimed that he relied on or reduced it to an adversarial process, and this was incorrect. In any case, the case was dismissed. It went to the High Court, where after having 2 days in the High Court in front of Miss Justice Marguerite Bulger, Miss Justice Bulger was a senior counsel who specialised in employment law, in particular in discrimination law. She's written books about discrimination, which would be sort of seminal or foundational books about discrimination law in Ireland and about employment equality. So if a judge was to know anything about employment law, then certainly Miss Justice Marguerite Bulger would have been such a judge. Now, the case went on for 2 days, and between the jigs and the reels, you had Ammi Burke, Miss Burke, making her own submissions, and basically she was arguing that her case should be sent back to the WRC for a fresh hearing. And in the other side, or in the other corner, as it were, in the dispute, there was the WRC, I think, as a notice party, and Arthur Cox, then her previous employer. The hearing went on for 2 days, but after Miss Burke applied for the judge to recuse herself from the case on the grounds of bias, according to Miss Burke, the judge said that she wasn't biased, and that the test for objective bias in such a circumstance is well known, and there's no way that she could be found guilty of objective bias, and therefore did not recuse herself, and the case went ahead. Yesterday was relatively uneventful insofar as Miss Burke made her submission, but it all went downhill today, and between the jigs and the reels, the bottom line is Miss Justice Butler has dismissed Miss Burke's case because of what she described as the appalling behaviour of Miss Burke, who insisted on reciting a mantra that somehow the judge was litigating the case for the WRC and for Arthur Cox, and she refused to reduce the volume of her voice and refused to stay quiet when the other side of the argument was making their case. So there was senior counsel for Arthur Cox, there was senior counsel for the Workplace Relations Commission, and Miss Burke insisted on reciting a chant, as it were, somewhat similar to the chant that they recited below in the Mullingar Park Hotel at the disciplinary hearing, Where is John Rogers? On this occasion, she was reciting this chant that the judge had basically, in distributing case law, which the judge said was in the submissions of both the WRC and Arthur Cox, in doing so that she was somehow litigating on behalf of the other parties. And Miss Burke, her behaviour, her conduct degenerated or degraded to the point where the judge had to consider dismissing the case on the grounds basically of the conduct of Miss Burke, and that's what she ended up doing. She had to do that, she felt. The judge in fact apologised to barristers for Arthur Cox and the Workplace Relations Commission over what she called the unacceptable, appalling situation. So Miss Burke's challenge was thrown out following her refusal to stop reciting her objections while other lawyers were attempting to speak. Miss Justice Marguerite Bulger granted the application from the WRC and Arthur Cox to dismiss the case in its entirety due to Miss Burke's conduct, which she said was undoubtedly an abuse of process. She's going to give a written judgment later on. She apologised to lawyers representing the WRC and Arthur Cox for having to endure what she called the unacceptable, appalling situation. She said the court is horrified that any litigant, and in particular a qualified solicitor, would conduct themselves in this manner before the court. The judge made her ruling as Miss Burke was continuously repeating her complaint at a raised volume that the court was litigating the case of Arthur Cox and the WRC. She was unhappy that the judge had supplied printed copies of case law, which the judge said was cited in submissions by the WRC and Arthur Cox. Reciting from a piece of paper, Miss Burke repeatedly asked the judge to take back the printed copies. However, Martina Burke joined then at the end, as Martina Burke is Ammi Burke's mother. She told the judge at the end, when the case was dismissed, that God will judge you. As the loud oration continued in the background, Mr. Ward, as senior counsel for Arthur Cox, urged the court to dismiss the case on account of Miss Burke's deliberate and conscious obstruction of the administration of justice, following a fair warning from the court. This behaviour we are being subjected to is precisely the behaviour the adjudication officer was subjected to by Miss Burke and her mother for an entire day. This was at the WRC hearing in the first instance that was dismissed. Catherine Donnelly, senior counsel for the WRC, said she tended to adopt Mr. Ward's submissions. Miss Justice Butler asked for authorities that would guide the court on whether it's possible to dismiss a judicial review case due to an applicant's conduct. Mr. Ward, senior counsel, said the situation was probably unprecedented. The judge left the courtroom 4 times on Thursday due to Miss Burke persisting to speak over her and counsel. Miss Justice Butler said that it was appalling that Miss Donnelly had to speak while Miss Burke was continuing to voice her discontent. She gave Miss Donnelly permission to raise her voice to be heard. However, the judge paused the hearing after the stenographer indicated she could not transcribe what Miss Donnelly was saying. When the judge returned several minutes later, Miss Burke resumed her speech, resulting in Mr. Ward's application for the proceedings to be dismissed. Miss Donnelly had earlier said the court could not give credence to the claim that it is legitimate for a litigant to disrupt proceedings if she is dissatisfied with a ruling. It was startling, she said, that Miss Burke argued that it was reasonable for her and her mother, Martina, to repeatedly ask WRC adjudication officer Kevin Bainham to reverse his refusal to summon 2 witnesses and to order law firm Arthur Cox to disclose certain emails Miss Burke wanted. There is an obligation on litigants to abide by rulings, and a WRC officer is entitled to dismiss a claim due to obstructive conduct, she said. There was also no basis for the court to conclude that the WRC's guidance is unreasonable, unfair, or beyond the WRC's powers. Mr. Bainham, he was the WRC adjudication officer, rejected Miss Burke's complaint that she was unfairly dismissed from Arthur Cox in November 2019. His April 2022 decision said he had inquired into her claim, but her hearing could not proceed due to persistent interruptions by members of the Burke family. Miss Burke submitted to the High Court on Thursday morning that it was not at all unreasonable for her and her mother to repeatedly ask the officer to conduct the hearing lawfully, and it was reasonable for them to maintain that Arthur Cox should be required to disclose the emails. Miss Burke was asking the judge to quash the WRC's April 2022 decision and to remit her unfair dismissal claim to a different adjudication officer for fresh consideration. So the prize for Miss Burke in this judicial review would have been to have this case sent back to the WRC for a fresh hearing. The judge has dismissed the case, however, on the basis of Miss Burke's conduct. Therefore, the judge hasn't even had to make a determination on the issues, on the arguments, on the submissions made by both parties. Such was the conduct of Miss Burke that the case was simply dismissed. And as I say, and I repeat myself, the judge has not had to make a determination about the issues as to whether the case should have been dismissed in the first instance by Kevin Bainham, the adjudicator, and whether it should be sent back to the WRC for a fresh hearing with a different adjudication officer. You would have thought that Miss Burke would have ensured that at the very least that Miss Justice Marguerite Bulger would have had to make a decision in that regard, but she hasn't done so. She hasn't had to do so because the conduct was so bad that she felt she had no choice but to accede to the request from the other side senior counsel to dismiss the case on the basis that Miss Burke's conduct was so appalling. What she was arguing for was to go back to the WRC. That's not a runner now, so the only place she can go now with it is to the Labour Court on an appeal of the WRC decision by the adjudication officer to dismiss her dismissal, or to dismiss her unfair dismissal case. So that's where it's going to go next. She had put in an appeal to the Labour Court. That was in abeyance whilst the High Court decision, the High Court case, the judicial review application was sort of pending. Obviously it's not pending anymore because it's been thrown out. So she can go on now to the Labour Court and seek to have the decision of the adjudication officer overturned and basically seek to have her case heard at the Labour Court about unfair dismissal for Arthur Cox. And remember, the hearing at the Labour Court will be a hearing de novo. In other words, it'll start from scratch. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, I would appreciate if you gave it the thumbs up down below. And you may be interested in subscribing to my YouTube channel. If you are, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon and you'll be notified every time I upload a video. And I generally upload a video or publish a video at least twice a week on this channel. Thanks a lot.